Welcome back to the Evolution of Horror. My name is Mike Muncer. As ever, I am your host. Now, usually in this podcast, we're looking at the history and the evolution of the horror genre, but this week we're bringing you a little bonus episode because I got the chance to sit down and chat to director Damien Leone about Terrifier 3, which is out in UK cinemas this week. This is, of course, the third part in the infamous slasher franchise, which has sort of took the world by storm, really, particularly with the sequel Terrifier 2, which came out a couple of years ago and was so much more successful than I think anyone, including the director, was expecting. This is, of course, the kind of ultra gory horror franchise about serial killer and slasher Art the Clown, cutting up people in some of the most gross and disgusting ways imaginable. Love them or hate them, you can't deny that these films are pretty massive in the horror world right now. And of course, Art the Clown is back for Terrifier 3. This time it's a kind of Christmassy themed Terrifier film, so a Christmas slasher. It's been a while since we've had one of those. And so I sat down and chatted to the creator of Terrifier, the director of all three movies, Damien Leone, about creating Art the Clown, creating this phenomenon in the horror genre, and some of the controversies and his responses to some of the criticisms thrown at this particular horror franchise. Now, in terms of what I thought of the film, well, you can hear our review on Fresh Blood. Fresh Blood is a monthly review strand on Patreon where me and my co-hosts discuss and review all of the new releases in horror. For a special spooky treat, me and my Fresh Blood co-hosts will actually be live streaming this month's edition of Fresh Blood on YouTube, which means anybody can check out this month's edition of Fresh Blood. It'll be on the 30th of October at 8 p.m. UK time. I'll be going live with my co-hosts Brad Hanson, Steph McKenna and Becky Dark, and we will all be discussing our thoughts on this movie. So be sure to tune into that on the 30th of October. But for now, please enjoy my spoiler-free interview with the director of Terrifier 3, Damien Leone.
How can you be sure it was really him? I could feel it.
Who is this Santa? He's scaring my kid.
Yeah, he's scaring me too.
Hey, Santa's handing out presents!
A big welcome to Damien Leone. Hello, Damien.
Hey, man. Good to see you.
So good to see you. How's London treating you so far?
It's everything I wanted it to be.
What, a bit drizzly, a bit cold.
That dreary but just beautiful architecture, you know, everything I wanted from American Wealth in London.
So it feels like Terrifier 2 only just happened, right? Tell us a little bit about the journey of how we got to Terrifier 3 and that, what must have been for you an incredibly fast turnaround.
The fastest turnaround I was ever involved in. After Terrifier 2 hit the theaters, it was sort of a life-changing moment for me.
Yeah.
Because Hollywood, so to speak, came knocking for the first time in my life. So I got repped by WME, and they set up meetings in LA, in Hollywood, and to go to all the studios, and I got to sit in boardrooms with the head of these studios. It was from nothing, you know, from just this indie, no budget guerrilla filmmaker to getting to sit in these boardrooms and pitch my ideas for Terrifier 3 or pitch other movies I might have. Was so exciting and thrilling. So that was cool.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and just the popularity of Art the Clown just exploded when now he's bigger than ever. Like right now, I'd say he reached another sort of I don't know, another level in the past 3 months, I would say, because just a lot of merchandise started coming out, and like big companies started taking on the IP, so and licensing. So you have Funko's now, he's in video games, he's in Call of Duty.
Amazing.
All this costumes, masks, it's wild. So he's got more eyes on him now than ever, which is also more pressure for me because we really have to deliver this time with part 3.
What is it about Art the Clown, do you think, that has really kind of struck a chord with horror audiences and audiences generally?
A few things. I think that there's certain boxes that I purposely set out to try and check when I was creating him, more so when I was once I turned him into a slasher, and I knew I wanted to continue on with this character. And so one is I always start with the visual aspect of the character. So all your slasher icons, and I don't call Art the Clown an icon. I love hearing people call him an icon.
I mean, I think he is by now.
See,
but anyway.
I love that. I appreciate that. I think that 20 years or so, then we can talk if he still has legs,
Yeah.
But I love hearing it. But they all have a very striking appearance, first and foremost, almost like a comic book character. And I knew that this character had to have that, even when I didn't expect him to go this far. I wanted to create the coolest looking character that I could create. Then when I turned him into a slasher, I said, all right, he's got to deliver the goods now. It's got to be kills that you don't typically see in mainstream horror movies.
Yeah.
If I could, since I did the special makeup effects, if I could push the envelope and show things that you don't usually get, I mean, that's a treat for horror fans. You want to be pushed. You want to push the envelope. But I think ultimately it comes down to his charisma, his charm. It's what David Howard Thornton brings to the character, and he just injecting that life and those gestures and those mannerisms and that theatricality. It's so unique, it's so refreshing, and even though this is a silent killer, he's so expressive, and there's so much human emotion that comes through that the audience really gravitates towards. And he's so unpredictable. You just don't know what he's going to do next. He's either going to repulse you or he's going to make you laugh your butt off, And I think it's striking that balance that's really hitting with the audience. I think the levity is a huge part of what makes him work as well as he does, juxtaposed with the hardcore violence and sadism of this character.
Yeah, do you want people to... Are they supposed to be kind of funny crowd pleasers in your head, or when you're directing them, are you trying to make them, terrifying, as the title would suggest?
It really depends on the scene itself. Ultimately, I want the movie to be a fun experience. Yeah. Right? I want the audience to leave saying, all right, this was a fantasy. All right, back to reality. We can get away with a lot in this film because, like I said, it's clearly not existing in reality. And I think that's so important. I think that allows us to push the envelope with the gore, because in the next moment, Art the Clown kind of winks at the audience and brings you right back, and you're having fun again. But it depends, because these movies, as fantastical as they can get, I always, at the core, I want them to be grounded in reality, at least the way the characters portray, how they experience everything and how they deal with everything, very grounded. So I think that's important. So there could be a moment where, for instance, in the original Terrifier, when Art the Clown kills who you think is going to be the final girl, and he shoots her in the middle of the movie, and then he finally kills her, I told David, I said, no jokes here. And no, I want you to just look at her stone cold, because I want to remind the audience that you are a sadistic, repulsive character, even though we could have a lot of fun with you. But so it really depends on the situation and what's happening in the story. Yeah, because that's really interesting, because your films have come under fire for that, right? Particularly the first movie, that people kind of felt that they took glee in the torturing and murdering of women, and particularly that key moment in the first movie where the naked woman is hung upside down. Like, what are your kind of response to those criticisms about the kind of potential misogyny, I suppose, in these films? I just personally laugh at it because it couldn't be further from the truth. I was raised by all women. If you ever hear, my interviews, I almost sound like Norman Bates to the degree that I talk about my mother and how influential she was and how important she is to me, and strong single mother growing up. So I don't, and it's sort of, in another regard, it's almost like a badge of honor to get to this point, because all of my heroes had to defend themselves in the same regard, like Romero, Tarantino. They all come under fire. So I don't really mind it. I don't pay any attention to it. I think there's also an element, isn't there, of we don't get a lot of horror movies like this anymore, and I think maybe that took people aback, even horror fans. I don't know, when you look at the trend of horror films over the last 10 years, whether it's movies like Get Out or Hereditary, those kind of big mainstream ones, the kind of gory slasher movies have sort of disappeared off the radar a little bit, haven't they? For sure, they've been gone for a while. Yeah, it's a very cyclical subgenre. Yeah, whereas horror itself is consistent. always consistent, but the subgenre changes. So now I think it's an itch that the horror community needs to scratch at this point. And I also think that the darker reality gets, or the more cynical people get in reality, the more they gravitate toward hardcore movies. I think that you sort of reach this fever pitch, and you just need some extra cathartic release. And I think that's one of the reasons why Terrifier 2 hit at the time it did, because we were just dealing with COVID. We were in lockdown.
Yeah.
Everything's getting very divisive, especially in the States. So it was like this opportunity to just get out, go into the movie theaters, and just sort of Terrifier 2 gave you the opportunity to just paint that absurdity on the screen, just the absurdity of violence and just how profound our mortality is. I mean, you can get very deep about it. I think that's really why horror movies are so effective. But I think it was just the perfect cathartic release that people needed at that time that they weren't ready for. They didn't realize how much they needed it.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously Terrifier 2 was so much bigger than the first movie in almost every way, right? The scale, the spectacle, the scope, the characters that you introduced, it became more fantastical as well and more epic. How did you find that in terms of like one-upping that movie this time round for Terrifier 3?
Tricky.
Yeah.
Certainly tricky, especially because I read every critique, good, bad, ugly, that comes out. Oh yeah, I dive right into the lines then. I want to see it all. I want to know, because there's gold to be gotten from that. As an artist, you could really improve. You could see what's working and what's not working, what's polarizing, and I knew making part 2 that going in this drastically different direction with the fantasy element was going to be very polarizing, because it's so different from what part 1 is. Part 1's a very sort of grounded, gritty slasher, straight like Maniac.
Yeah.
Now we're bringing in Dream Warriors, and we're bringing in, Red Sonja, Conan the Barbarian, Excalibur, just things that it's another subgenre that I loved growing up, and I wanted to meld those two genres together. So I knew that was going to be polarizing, and then it turned out to be polarizing. There's people who absolutely love it. There's people who wish we kept the tone of the original. So now I tried to strike a balance and see if I could capture the best of part 1 and 2 with part 3, while wrapping it around now in a Christmas atmosphere. So this one has its own flavor, which is interesting, which is exciting, because you don't want to, that's one of my fears, is just getting repetitive and just redundant and repeating the same thing each movie. That's the last thing I want to do. I want to keep giving you something fresh, but I want to make sure that we keep clicking the boxes of the essential elements to what make this franchise work. So as long as I have Art the Clown and the kill scenes and we don't screw that up, I think that's a bit of a safety net that I could always know that's there. And then maybe the other 50% or 40%, I can kind of have fun and take some big swings, and hopefully something really exciting and new comes out of that.
You got that fantastic final girl now as well. We have a heroine in Sienna, right? Yes. As well, like introducing her in part 2. Again, was that you mentioned you read every review and you hear every criticism. Was that a response again to the criticism of the first one, that we didn't really have that kind of heroine character there?
It actually wasn't, because I had this character. I created this character before I made that movie. I was actually going to put that character in another film as a final girl, but it wound up falling apart.
Right.
And it wasn't Sienna. It was she had different characteristics and whatnot, different story, but it was visually, it was the same character, and it was going to be a final girl. I knew I wanted to have this badass Valkyrie fantasy character in a modern slasher.
Yeah.
So once we established Art the Clown as a villain, Terrifier is sort of just a showcase for Art the Clown. It's almost like a proof, Dave calls it a proof of concept. I kind of like that. Where it's really just me asking the audience, do you accept this character? Is it worth pursuing? So once I could really start focusing on now the lore and bringing in a worthy adversary and characters that you empathize with, a final girl that you can get behind. That really excited me about Terrifier 2. Sienna's my favorite character. I love her more than I do Art the Clown, as much as I love Art the Clown. That's my baby, and I know what I will be known for at this point. But I'm so in love with Sienna's character, and she's very close to me. There's a lot of personal relationships in my life and family members that I draw from their characteristics, and I injected that into Sienna. Very vulnerable character, the most vulnerable I've ever been as a writer, and hopefully that's kind of one of the reasons why she, people relate to that character and they find her so effective. But of course, ultimately, it's because Lauren Levera is just a superstar. She's a rock star, and she knocked that character out of the park. And she loves that character almost as much, if not more, than I do, which is virtually impossible because as a writer, you give birth to that character. And she has so much respect for that character, and she becomes very vulnerable playing that character, especially in part 3. Lauren goes to places that she never went to in the second installment. And we were all just in awe of her ability to do that and how fearless she was and how vulnerable she had to be in some situations. And there's the finale of the movie where she's really in a vulnerable state and it took a week, maybe more, to shoot that. So you're in that state for not just a day, maybe 5 days, and 12-hour days, 14-hour days. So it's a lot for an actor, but you have to, everybody respects the role and the film. So it's great to work with those people and share that.
So cool. And of course, like, these movies are known for their incredible gore, those amazing practical and makeup effects. Tell me a little bit about creating some of these kind of kills and deaths in this particular movie. Do you ever have to, are you able to go as absolutely as far as you want with anything? Or do you ever come up with some ideas and you kind of think, maybe I need to rein that in? Like, how do you kind of work through the kill scenes and the gore in these movies?
Yeah, no, that's great. And it does happen often. Usually when I'm writing it or thinking about it, it's 5 steps worse. And then I say, that's way too far. You've crossed the line now, even for you. And got to dial it back, because my fear is really dipping into an area of extreme distaste and alienating, large majority of your audience, and that's not my goal here. That's very easy to do. I could think of really, really awful things, and you can show them but to me, that's just it's incompetent. There's ways to do this, even if we're dealing with very taboo subjects, especially with part 3, right? There's already rumors about children and animals and whatnot. And these are awful things, but there's ways to approach it as an artist where you could potentially do it in a way where it's still accessible to a mass audience. It really depends on how it's executed. So that's always a line I'm trying to walk as an artist and see if I can pull that off. It's a bit of an experiment for me and a test for me as an artist, like a less is more test if possible. So we'll see. There's certainly some situations in part 3 with that test.
Absolutely. And finally then, what's next for Art the Clown and this franchise? Do you have ideas for more? Are we going to see more beyond part 3?
I think that this franchise can keep going forever, honestly. But for me personally, I want to make sure that there's still fresh ideas there, and I can still keep potentially outdoing what I've done in the prior installments, especially keep delivering fresh kill scenes and keep the levity interesting and fun. My biggest fear is just losing all of that, and it's just becoming getting more and more stale as we go and getting redundant and nothing left to say. That's one of the reasons why I don't like spelling everything out in these movies. I give you answers, but then I raise more questions, and you won't know everything until I'm done with my saga, basically. Or else, if you do, then what is the point? You know the whole story, and it's one of the traps that a lot of these franchises fall into. And I'm trying to, like I said, I read every critique, but I'm also a huge movie fan, and I try and learn from all the mistakes of all the franchises.
Do you think you could ever do like what Wes Craven did with Freddy, or what John Carpenter did with Michael Myers, and just like hand it over to a studio and other filmmakers?
Yes.
Like, could you ever do that?
Believe it or not, I absolutely can. It's something that I'm very aware of, and something I'm willing to do as long as I've concluded the Damien Leone Terrifier.
Sure, yeah.
Where I have nothing left to say and I feel absolutely satisfied. I would have no problem handing the character off. I think the character is too, interesting and fun to just put to bed, and I'm sure eventually another actor will portray him, and other directors will come in and, who knows. And I think that's great. I think these characters all should go on. But you don't want to damage a timeline.
Yeah.
And that, to me, that's where that's where some of the franchises lose me. And it's, why did I follow that character for 9 movies where ultimately they served no purpose whatsoever?
The retconning every few movies. Yeah.
So, and that's not the fault of the filmmaker or the writer. It's really the fault of the studio, and you can't even really blame the studio because it's just a financial thing and the fans want more. I have fans come up to me. I do horror conventions all the time. They said, please never stop making these movies. They're like, if you make 100, I will see 100 of them. Just keep going. Which is the most beautiful thing to hear. Yeah. But I promise you're not going to like Terrifier 100 as much as you like Terrifier 3.
For sure. Amazing. Damien Leone, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure, buddy. Thank you.
Thank you. And there we go. That's it for my discussion with Damien Leone. So, as I mentioned, if you want to hear my thoughts, my review of Terrifier 3, I will be discussing it with my Fresh Blood co-hosts, which will be streamed live and for free for anyone to check out on this month's spooky edition of Fresh Blood, which is going to be on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/evolution of horror, going out live at 8 p.m. on Wednesday, the 30th of October. Join us then. In the meantime, we'll be back Friday for the next episode of our current season of the Evolution of Horror, Nature Bites Back. This week, we're looking at 2 really interesting movies involving kind of real life, horrific encounters with animals on film. We're talking about Roar from 1981 and Grizzly Man from 2005, so be sure to check that out on Friday. Thank you so much for listening, and join us again soon for another episode of the Evolution of Horror.